Okay, so I'm going to start with an introduction here. A few words about Cindy. And Cindy Rasicot is an author. She's a retired marriage and family therapist, and she leads women's support groups and writing workshops that are focused on personal healing and creativity. And she also hosts the YouTube program Casual Buddhism. And her past guests have included Jack Kornfield, Sylvia Borstein, and Joan Halifax. And Cindy has received temporary ordination twice from Bhikkhuni Dhammananda at her all-female monastery in Thailand. In 2020, Cindy published Finding Venerable Mother, a Daughter's Spiritual Quest to Thailand, which was an award-winning memoir of her spiritual healing through loving connection with Dhammananda. And tonight, Cindy is joining us from her home in Port Richmond, California, to share with us some insights from her latest book, This Fresh Existence, Heart Teachings from Bhikkhuni Dhammananda. And this book chronicles Dhammananda's quest to overcome the opposition of the Thai Sangha in order to become the first woman fully ordained in the Thai Theravadin Buddhist tradition. But I've been fortunate enough to finish this book on a long plane flight, and this book is much more than that story. It's also an in-depth dialogue with a very wise teacher who is pointing us in the direction of collective freedom. So, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Writing this book has been a huge part of my life, and I'm going to share with you in the beginning portion a PowerPoint, because some of you may not know who Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni is. And so I'm going to share my screen. It worked before when I did it, so let's see if I can make it work again. I think I can. Yeah. So the book is, of course, This Fresh Existence, Heart Teachings from Bhikkhuni Dhammananda. Let me just move right on to this next slide. So the book is organized in 3 parts. The first part is called Her Story, which is the story about Venerable Dhammananda's path to ordination. I should say that Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni was the very first Thai woman to receive full ordination in the Thai Theravada tradition in Thailand. So basically, at the time she received ordination, she had to go to Sri Lanka to be ordained because Thailand does not permit ordination of women. There were, at the time, 2001, when she took novice ordination, there were 300,000 male monks. And she was the lone Theravada nun. There's 2 stages or more than 2, but 2 basic stages. There's novice or seminary ordination and higher ordination or bhikkhuni ordination. And the bhikkhuni is the equivalent of a female monk. So again, the first part is called Her Story, Venerable Dhammananda's Path to Ordination. Heart-to-heart wisdom, it's what I call the hands-on portion of the book, because it's a series of engaging conversations I had with Venerable Dhammananda during the pandemic about practicing compassion, forgiveness, meditation, how to deal with common difficulties like jealousy, dealing with anger, loneliness, uncertainty. And I'm getting a lot of positive feedback that people really like this part of the book because, you know, who doesn't want to learn some helpful instructions and lessons, wise teachings on how to cope with these issues. The third part is called The Light of Our Beings. It's reflections on the ordained life. It's Venerable Dhammananda's reflections on 20 years of being ordained. And I also share 1 chapter on my experience receiving temporary ordination, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So here's where I first met Venerable. I look so young. She basically, this is probably 2005. She told me in the beginning, everything begins in our hearts. And she said, compassion begins with our heart first. When I feel compassion, my heart softens. And when my heart is soft, I am truly open to my shared connection with others. The conversation and compassion appears in part 2 of the book. And I want to say we've known each other for 20 years now. She's taught me everything I know about loving kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. And my friend Vina actually went and met her in December. And probably later I'll let her talk a little bit about what her experience was like. But she's just a very special, warm human being. So who is Venerable Dhammananda? Let's go a little deeper into this. As I said, she's the first fully ordained Theravada Buddhist nun in Thailand. And in order to understand the significance of how courageous this was, I need to give a brief introduction to women's ordination in Buddhism. People may not realize that the Buddha ordained women in his lifetime. This was revolutionary because he lived in 6th century India BCE within the Brahmanical caste system. Women were considered impure and a hindrance to spiritual growth. Venerable Dhammananda calls the Buddha the first feminist because he was the first one in world religions to say that men and women had equal spiritual potential and that women could achieve enlightenment. His golden phrase was, they can see it with their own eyes. So many of us know that within Buddhism, there's a fourfold Buddhist community: lay men, lay women, fully ordained men, monks or bhikkhus, and fully ordained women, nuns or bhikkhuni. Now, the Buddha called for this fourfold community before he passed away. He called for these pillars of support in order to sustain and continue Buddhism in the future. So if we look at Thailand in terms of their 7-year history as a Buddhist nation, there has never been a female lineage of fully ordained women. And as I said, at the time she was ordained, there were 300,000 male monks, and she was the lone Theravada nun. Venerable uses the phrase, a metaphor of a chair, to describe the situation. You could say, in my country, one leg of the chair, the fully ordained nuns, is missing. Being Venerable, I needed to bring back the fourth leg, and she has dedicated her life to restoring women their rightful place in Buddhism. She saw it as her responsibility to establish the missing heritage that the Buddha granted women in his lifetime. In this picture, you see Venerable Dhammananda before she was ordained. She's on the right. Her lay name, her birth name was Chatsumarn Kabil Singh. A few words about her mother, Venerable Vormai. She was a feminist and I want to say kind of a radical feminist in her own right. She was a jujitsu. She did jujitsu in 1932. She rode for 29 days her bicycle from Bangkok to Singapore with a group of Boy Scouts. She was a journalist, and she took ordination. She literally, I'll go ahead and say this. She, in May 1956, when Venerable Dhammananda was 11, she took her then daughter, Chatsumarn, and 3 adopted children, took them to a barbershop, lined them up against the back wall, and proceeded to have her head shaved without saying anything to the children, her kids. And basically, she had had a scare with probably with cancer, and she turned to meditation, and she decided she wanted to take ordination. So she then went over to her teacher, who gave her what's called the 10 precepts. At that time, it was not, she was not fully ordained as a bhikkhuni because it wasn't even available at that time. But nevertheless, I'm not going to say too much more about her, but she was her daughter's monastic role model. She founded the temple Sangdhamma Kalyani Temple in Nakhon Pathom, where Venerable Dhammananda resides today, and I go every year to visit. It's about 60 miles west of Bangkok. And I talk a lot more about her mother in the book, but I'm not going to take time to do it right here. So looking at Venerable Dhammananda, you can see how dressed up she is. At that time, she was a successful TV personality, a popular host of a TV Dharma show, an internationally recognized Buddhist scholar, a feminist, an environmental activist, a wife, and a mother with 3 sons. She often tells the story of how she made the decision when it happened that she decided, I want to seek ordination. She was probably getting herself made up for the TV show. She was looking at her reflection in the mirror, and she heard a voice in English, mind you, say, "How long do I have to do this? How long?" She said, "You should have seen me dressed up in matching outfits, perfectly manicured nails. I wore lots of jewelry and makeup. At that time, I was desperately lonely and wanting to do something more meaningful with my life." So here you see she is having her head shaved. This is her novice ordination in Sri Lanka. And at the time she was 57 years old. She had been a teacher for 27 years at Thammasat University, one of 2 of the probably more prestigious universities in Bangkok. She had divorced her husband, given up her teaching career, her family, and her wealth and fame to be ordained. That is why she is quoted as saying, "You leave at the point you are most successful." That is renunciation. So when Venerable returned to Thailand from Sri Lanka in 2001, she hoped things would remain quiet, but that was not the case. There was a huge uproar in the press. She was dubbed the rebel monk and personally attacked. She didn't read the newspapers for 2 years. I once asked her if she thought she was brave, and she said, "Actually, I have no bravery. All I have is strong faith in the Buddha. I have traversed the globe so that my grandchildren will be proud of their grandmother who cleared the path for them to walk proudly as Buddhists." So here we get into how she has built what's called, well, I've been talking to lay audiences. I have to explain what a sangha is. So here, this is how we get into how she built the female sangha. She does something called temporary ordination, which is a 2-week period in which women take the 10 precepts, shave their heads, learn about the Vinaya, which are the monastic code of rules for bhikkhuni and seminaries. She did this really so women could get a sense of what is monastic life like, because there had never been any monastics in Thailand. It's very traditional for adolescent Thai young men to go into the monkhood for 3 months. It has been. I'm not sure it's quite as practiced today as it was, but it was really a strong tradition for many years. So Venerable said, "Well, why can't we do this for women?" So she created what's called temporary ordination. Since 2009, Venerable has given novice ordination to more than 1,000 women. 285 of these women have stayed in the robes, have gone on to receive full ordination as bhikkhunis. The picture of me on the right was taken December 2022 when I was ordained for the 2nd time. It's a very profound experience. I kind of liken it to Joseph Campbell and the initiation stories. I write about it in the 3rd section of the book. So I'm wrapping up this presentation here. Bhikkhuni Dhammananda Mahateri. Mahateri, she received that honorific title, which means in Pali, most venerated one. She received it in December of 2022. That's why I took ordination to honor her, because she had been ordained for 20 years. And I would like to read what she says in the afterword of the book. "A society in which women have been suppressed for so long is not easily changed. As Buddhists, it is our responsibility to fight against injustice. We must remove this wall of illusion, this wall of patriarchy, hierarchy, and inequity to see the truth of the Buddhist teaching. Whether the oppression is political, social, religious, whatever, we have to think hard about it together, not separately. The extent to which we can think collectively and commit together is the extent to which we can bring about social change." And if you want to have a chance to see Venerable, she's actually teaching a class right now at Spirit Rock. It's called Groundbreaking Courage. And even though it's at 7 Pacific time, each one is recorded and you can sign up at any point. There are 3 sessions. It started May 15th. We had our second one last night, and the third one is the 29th. But she's really kind of amazing. And if you want to get a chance to experience her in person, I would encourage you to sign up for that class. Let me stop the share. You know, I would like to take questions at this point, just because I'll go into my story and why I wrote the book and how I met her and all that. But it's, sometimes it's hard to understand the process of ordination and all that. So I just want to make sure if people have questions, I answer them at this point. Does anyone have a question? Okay, I will continue then. Did I see anything? Oh, yes, Bill. Oh, and Vita. I'm not sure who raised first. Was it Bill?
I think it was Bill.
It was Bill. Okay.
So I'm a little confused about the process. She was ordained in Sri Lanka, and the book said something about ordained within. There's something about the Mahayana tradition.
Okay. Yeah. Thank
Ordained.
you. Yeah, that was her mother. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just was confused about the transition of ordination, it being official when you're ordained within one tradition, and yet you're seeking ordination within, a sister tradition.
Great question. So her mother at the time, Venerable was a professor. She found out her mother could be ordained in the highest level, full ordination, as in Taiwan, as in the Mahayana tradition. It wasn't yet available in Thailand to do the Theravada tradition, which is the main school in that people practice in Thailand. So Venerable, when she came, she's kind of an interesting story, because she also was very close to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And she has in the back of her temple a medicine Buddha, a Tibetan medicine Buddha. So she studied religions, and she studied Mahayana, Tibetan, Theravadin. When it came time for her to choose which tradition do I want to be ordained in, she did choose Theravada, because it had died out in Sri Lanka, and it was restarted in 1998. And because of her academic studies, she knew that it was a valid ordination. I think what you're talking about, this is sort of complicated, but basically, because the Theravadan women's Sangha lineage had died out, the Chinese or Mahayana monks gave ordination to the Sri Lankan women in Bodh Gaya, India in 1998. And they said, just like you said, how can you be ordained in Mahayana and call yourself Theravada? So the Sri Lankan monks took the 20 Sri Lankan novices back to Sri Lanka and gave them a second ordination in the Theravada tradition. And Venerable Dhammananda said that was a valid ordination. There's a special word for it in Thai. I can't remember what it was. But that's how the current iteration of the Theravada women's female lineage got started in Asia. It died out in the 10th century. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if I understand, it was because the Sri Lankans had received ordination in China under the Mahayana tradition,
Yes.
and were able to transfer that successfully for themselves to Sri Lanka, where Dhammananda received ordination in Sri Lanka by these Theravadin nuns. I assume it was nuns who ordained her.
It's actually monks, and what the monks, the Sri Lankan monks did, they were present at the Mahayana ordination. They took the Sri Lankan women back, gave them a second ordination because they said people aren't going to believe that they're Theravada because they were ordained in a different tradition. So the monks actually gave a dual ordination essentially, and so that was 1998. Not too long after, Venerable went in 2001 and received her ordination, her novice ordination. Sure. That was a great question. It's complicated. Yeah.
So Cindy, can
Hi,
I go?
Vina.
Hi. Cindy, as you know, I read your book earlier this year. It was wonderful, loved it. I think in the third part of the book, you talk about the concept of no self.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about this concept.
Sure. Do you have anything you can reference there so I can quickly go to that? I'm not sure
I
where.
don't have the book, unfortunately.
Oh, that's okay. Non-self would have been in grasping. Yeah, because I was talking about I, me, my, mine. I'll just go ahead and jump into the story.
Okay.
Yeah. And in 2020, I wrote this book. Oh, I guess you can't see me. Well, anyway, it's Finding Venerable Mother. It was my first book. It was a spiritual memoir. And it talked about how I met Venerable Dhammananda when my family and I moved in 2005 to Bangkok for 3 years. My son was then 13. My former husband worked for an oil company, and we lived there for 3 years. And that's how I originally met her. What I want to say about Anatta. Okay, so that was 2005. The years go on. I received ordination in 2014. 2020, I write my memoir about meeting her, and it's really a story about healing the mother-daughter relationship. And I say to Venerable, I really want her to like the book. You know, it's like looking for that acknowledgement. And Venerable Dhammananda is unusual for an Asian woman because she's honest. She's not afraid. They don't usually like to confront people or say anything ostensibly negative in public because the other person will lose face. And what she said to me directly was, too much I, me, my, mine, too much grasping. Now, what she means there is that the Buddha said, let me go to my notes so I don't mess it up. Yeah. She was giving me this basic lesson on letting go of I, me, my, mine. And she told me a powerful Dharma story that evening. It wasn't just to me, it was to all the women in the monastery. And the next day, we were sitting together and she goes, you know, I told that story just for you. And she was teaching me a key Buddhist teaching, which is clinging to oneself causes suffering. She wanted me to let go of her so that I would have the freedom to grow spiritually. Anatta, non-self, and maybe one of you can chime in here too from the Sangha. It's a complicated concept. I once remember sitting with her and going, well, what the Buddha was saying essentially in a nutshell was, you would know this from Indian history, there was a sense of a permanent self called atta. And anatta is non-super, whatever. You understand what I'm saying. What he was saying was there is no permanent I. We're always changing. Life is impermanent and life is suffering. And so once I asked her, well, what do you mean? Am I not here? You know, is there no Cindy here? And she goes, no, Cindy's here. It's just that he wanted us to understand that emotions rise and fall away. There is no constant I or a permanent self that you can move from one situation to the next, from one lifetime to the next. I hope I'm giving you a basic understanding.
Sure.
Yeah. It's basically kind of letting go of ego. not grasping, not clinging to oneself. And that has been her main lesson to me over and over and over again. And what she likens it to is when we let go of that I, me, my, mine, we come into a shared connection with others. And that is a very beautiful moment. And when you sit with Donna, with Venerable, which you have, you'll notice that she's fully present.
She
And
is.
yeah, maybe you can describe that after. Let me just finish this thought and you can say what your experience is like. Because she's really at a higher level of awareness. Let's say she's advanced spiritually. So she's let go of a lot of that self-identification, we might call it.
Mhm.
And I am curious, what was it like for you to sit with her?
Well, let me begin by going back a little. I think it was during the pandemic that I read your memoir, Finding
Mhm.
Venerable Mother, and that's when I was introduced to Dhammananda.
Mhm.
And then last year, you invited me to your podcast, Casual Buddhism,
Oh,
where I
yes,
got to
right,
actually talk to her
right.
virtually. And then when my family made a plan to go to the Far East, I said, I have to go to Thailand and I must meet Dhammananda because she seemed like such a, like you said, she's present, but she's also so full of life and joy.
Mhm.
So I made it a point to go visit her, and you made it possible, Cindy. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And it was one of the best um, moments of this year. I must say, it was so beautiful, so joyful. We got a tour of the monastery, and we had lunch, a vegetarian lunch with the other monks. Do you call them monks?
Uh, I think you would. It's so interesting that Venerable calls them nuns. In this country, nuns, Western, they're not using that term anymore because there's something called a third class of machi, which is white
Mhm.
robe nuns. And I'm not going to go into that, but I call them nuns. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we had lunch with them, and we got to spend about 15 minutes with Dhammananda. She was busy. Her son was sick. He was hospitalized, and I know that she was on her way to see him. But the 15 minutes that she spent with us, she was fully attentive. She had
Mhm.
so many questions about us, about India, about where we live now. By the way, I live in Duluth, which is, a neighborhood in Atlanta, North Atlanta.
Okay.
So we talked about all of that. And it was it was one of the highlights of my year.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And well, with my explanation, was that helpful to answer your
It-
question about non-self?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I think you meant it was like letting go of your ego.
I, I,
Letting go
I
of
mean,
I
that's
mean,
kind of a simplification of it. It's a pretty,
yeah.
maybe I could call on, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what her name is. Stephanie, would you like to say anything about anatta?
Well, first, I'd just like to say thank you.
Sure, sure.
um, and yeah, and I have a few curious questions myself, but yeah, I actually teach for Venerable Analio, who
Oh, wow. Okay.
was, as you know, in Sri Lanka and a Theravada monk. And the way that I've come to understand anatta is, I mean, as you said, there's a cosmological component to it about what's left when we end this life. But truly, I think to Western practitioners, my experience is that's not what is as interesting, is how do we take the concept of anatta into our daily lives. And just as you said, this body, these feelings that arise, or Vedana, this mind, it's all impermanent. It's all in flux. It's all in flow. And whatever is arising right now is the consequence of causes and conditions, that some we can know, some we can't, But so all of this clinging to this self as this fixed entity is rather delusional. Uh, and and so when we can loosen that, we can have a lot of compassion, a lot of forgiveness, and yet still take responsibility. You know, the Stephanie that might have said something that wasn't very wise 15 minutes ago needs to take responsibility for that today. And yet there's always this possibility for change. Change is always happening. So I actually love Ruth King's ideas about, you know, nothing is permanent, nothing is perfect, and nothing is personal. It's all causes and conditions, or as Analio says, you know, because another, you know, anatta and emptiness are really synonyms, and you know, what is empty is filled to the rim with causes and conditions. I love that. So
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you. And did you have some questions?
yeah, I was curious about a couple things, and my book is on order, so I apologize that I've not read it, but I'm
Oh, it's
thrilled
okay.
and looking forward to reading it. Um, yeah, I was curious how many Westerners come over and participate in the, you know, the short ordination
Yes.
experience. Is that mostly for Thai females, or how many
Yes.
Westerners? And the question I just had, Cindy, is how is the relationship today? I also studied with Tanisara and Kittisaro, who have their own history of um, to, um, of experience in terms of Tanisara, you know, her experience with ordination, or and her passion about women being accepted as equals. So I'm curious how culturally, how is it today?
Well, I'm going to back up and then get to your question, because I'm kind of doing my presentation a little backwards today, but I kind of like it because it's mixing it up. I just want to say how I met her. I didn't go to Thailand looking for a spiritual teacher. It just happened. It happened very serendipitously. And it was like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So I just wanted to say that for me personally, that was my experience. And it happened at a conference called Aid to Women in Development. It was an international women's conference. And there was an afternoon session called Faith, Feminism, and the Power of Love. And I thought, who pairs feminism with faith and love? And that was just intriguing to me. And so basically, there had been some tension in the room, just two differing opinions, pretty strong. And there was a silence in the room. And into that silence, Venerable stepped and said, we cannot solve anything with anger. Anger doesn't get us anywhere. It is much harder to practice loving kindness and compassion. That is the goal of Buddhism. Being a Westerner, not just a Westerner, we all struggle with anger. It just really, it really jolted me. It kind of like, it made me awake. She brought me awake in that moment. And it was like, there's something going on here. She said, anyone who wants to come and see me, she was much younger then, come down to the monastery and visit me. And she pulled out a business card, and that's how it all started. As for what's interesting about Venerable is her son, her oldest son, her youngest son, oops, I just forgot his name. That's all right. Shatakur. He said to his mother, Venerable Long May, because that's what we call her, Venerable Mother in Thai, you're about 50 years ahead of your time. And sometimes it's a little bit, the Western women kind of really respond to her in a way. I think that the Thai women love her. They are by far, when I took ordination in 2014, there was 108 Thai women, and I was the only Farang or foreigner. But there are Westerners who go and seek ordination with her because she's so visionary in terms of change and what she did. Could you ask me, keep going with your questions? Because I think you were asking some other stuff too.
Yeah, I was just curious, how are the relationships between the bikinis and the monks now? Like, how
Yeah,
are they?
I think I asked for that, and I'm going to actually go to that because I happen to know where that is. Back to your question about the monks' attitudes towards us, they are much more open and accepting. But the year I was ordained, I saw how nasty people could be. There was one radio talk show host in particular who chose the harshest criticism and played it over and over again. So people who had not listened to the program regularly thought there were many people who were against the Bhikkhuni ordination. I challenged them and told them, this is my address. Please come and visit the temple and see for yourself. No one came. I believe that whatever the unwholesome mind generates will destroy itself. I really believe that. If you do things out of kusala chitta, wholesome mind, the wholesomeness will nourish you. And I think my sense from talking to her is that the elders of the Sangha are more against Bhikkhuni ordination. I should say that for those of you who haven't read the book, there were 3 waves of attempts to ordain women. The first was 1928. And the Sangha became so upset, the elders in the Sangha created the Sangha Act, which forbade monks to give ordination to women. There's a whole bunch of arguments they gave, which are kind of cockamamie in my opinion, but why women couldn't be ordained. And that law is still in effect today. So on her identity card, even though she's Bhikkhuni Dhammananda Mahateri, is her lay name Chatsumarn Kabil Singh, because there's no label in the computer for Bhikkhuni. So what can I say? Things are changing. The younger monks are more open. She certainly has her supporters. And also, I recall a moment in December 2022, a very well-known monk who, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name right now. He was very famous for helping HIV/AIDS patients in Thailand. Very well-known, very well revered. She came on stage, she welcomed him, and she turned, and I noticed she was crying. Just briefly. And she didn't stay crying for too long, but I asked her afterwards, what were you crying about? And she said, there are so very few monks who supported us. And that still gives me chills, because it told me what she stood up against to do what she did. She says she wasn't brave. Personally, I think it took a lot of determination, courage, and faith in the Buddha, and determination to do what she did. And that's a great question. Thank you. I sort of like this, just questions. Is that okay with people? We'll continue in this vein. Does anyone else have questions?
You know, I just had a thought that I thought I would share with you. There's a quote attributed to Tolstoy that says, as long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be war. And I serve on an advisory council for Dharma Voices for Animals. And it's an international group, and one of the countries that we work in is Thailand, and trying to support the monks in honestly eating less meat. And mostly that comes from a place of compassion, but under the guise of trying to help their health, because so many of the older monks have so many health conditions that are related, you know, diabetes, heart conditions. But they are so challenging to change.
Yes.
So challenging to change. And I make that reference to Tolstoy because I believe all these things are interconnected. And so it doesn't surprise me that it takes a very long time
Yeah, let me, thank you for saying that. Oh, that's the wrong book. No wonder I couldn't find what I was looking for. Let me just read apropos of what you're saying, a little bit more of the afterword, because it's so powerful. And let me read you this poem. It's called Crack in the Wall of Patriarchy. I am but a small crack in the wall of patriarchy, the wall of hierarchy, the wall of injustice. Suddenly there are more cracks. Eventually the wall crumpled. Lo and behold, the Buddha is standing on the other side with his opened arms to welcome his daughters who struggled to keep up the heritage given by the Buddha. And in the afterword, she speaks about that speech, and she says, I don't think I read this, in the 20 years I've been ordained, I've grown to appreciate that change cannot happen. Did I read this overnight? No, sorry. It took years for the destructive social attitudes barring women from certain activities to form, and it will take time to deconstruct them. If you study religion, you will discover that previously there was a matriarchal society in which the mother goddess was revered for her role in taking care of the earth and the environment. Our society may have been in the hands of men for too long. It is our responsibility to clean up the spiritual mess left behind. And if you know her, she's not pointing fingers at men. She's I almost want to say she's talking in a general sense about our ignorance, the ignorance of humanity. Because she is a Buddhist first and a feminist second, and she talks in the book about, she said, she came to a turning point in her life in 1983 because she was an academic. She went to a feminist conference with, I don't have it here, Diana Eck, who's a famous Harvard professor. And she spoke on Thai Bhikkhuni and the issue of women's social change and religion, I think it was. Anyway, she had never met feminists. And so she was kind of troubled by the fact that Western feminists, myself included, were kind of a little too angry. And it didn't fit for her in the Asian culture. She knew she couldn't go forth and be effective with that mentality. So what am I saying here? So as a feminist, she realized, she was a teacher at that point, she realized it's what people fighting for change and social justice, they suffer. She said one woman at that conference, her hair turned white when she was in prison for so long. So she said, boy, I better take care of myself if I'm gonna be in, I'm the only one in Thailand who has this information. It was 20 years later, but she said she wanted to put it into action. She wanted herself to be ordained. That was where she kind of began the process of galvanizing towards her decision. And the reason I'm saying this is because now she says, as a feminist, I'm not angry. If people are upsetting or frustrating, I look at it as that they're ignorant. It's their ignorance, they're not bad people. And that's a big lesson for me. I just wanted to share that. Let me say, maybe, do you have any more questions? It's so interesting to talk to you. Thank you.
No, I don't think so, but I do think what you just said is a real testament to having a long history of a metta practice
Yes.
and coming into this arena of, I'll put quotations around it, feminism or and yeah, I mean, I do think we in the West are undoing a lot as we both practice metta and but I think of Bell Hooks writing on love and on anger and she makes a valid place for anger, but it certainly isn't the place of affecting change. But I just think as Westerners, we come from a very different place. We come from such an individualized culture. We don't come from a culture that has supported an open heart, really, a practice of cultivating these, beautiful mind heart states. And how fortunate she is to have had that background as she stepped into this arena and could see it through those eyes. Like, that's amazing. And therefore seemingly something to teach us, not to beat ourselves up because,
Right.
whoa, that's not our background.
Right.
But just out of a real place of hope and possibility. Yeah. So thank
Yes,
you for that story.
yes, and I want to add to that I alluded earlier that she tries on many traditions. She made a point in 1999 to go to Taiwan, I believe, and take the Bodhisattva vows, which is Mahayana. She took 38 precepts. She felt she wanted to understand that when she became ordained, her life would no longer be her own. She would be serving for the good of others. She's very clear about that. And she taught me everything I know about loving kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. So it's very true what you're saying about the quality of metta from her is quite beautiful. And you feel it in her presence. I felt the love. I mean, I feel it when I'm with her. I have felt it and will continue to feel it. And, for me personally, I always felt a sense of joy after I visited her because she's very positive. And I think Vina alluded to that she's, even last night, she ended the program by saying, be joyful. We think the Buddha, of course, talked about life as suffering, but he also said we can overcome suffering. And I'm not an expert Buddhist, so I'm not going to get too carried away with that. But basically, she helped me deal with ongoing depression that I struggled with all my life. And I remember one time, I still have the recording on my phone. 2016, I said, I was just, I was depressed. I was crying. And I said, I'm really upset. And my mind is so dark. And she said, blocked. You cannot see. So much story deep down in there must come out. When you look at that experience with the Buddha's mind, when your mind is anchored, you can see clearly and you can let it go. And you can say, oh, I see. I don't need you anymore. I can let you go. And because she is so present, she was actually talking to, I always feel like she's talking to me directly about something I need to hear. In my I had some early childhood trauma, and there was someone I needed to forgive. And she saw me clinging, not being able to relieve myself of that trauma and that memory. So she was helping me. She gave me hope that day. And I still go back to that tape and listen to it. Because what she was telling me was, as you practice, as you become more aware, and forgiveness is a practice, and I have been able to forgive that person, but I wasn't then. It is possible. She always, by her very presence as a role model and living the Dharma, living Buddhism as she does, I was inspired, and I still am inspired by her. And I'm not sure how much time we have. I think we have an hour. Is that what we have? Okay. So before I draw this to a close, I really would like to ask Vina if she wouldn't mind talking a little bit about her book, because her book is about women and women's issues, and it's a beautiful book. And we shared the same publisher in 2000. I think your book was 2021, right?
2020, fall of 2020.
Sorry. Anyway,
Yes.
go, Vina.
Close, very close. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Sure.
Well, this is my book. It's called Purple Lotus. It's partly set in India, but most of it is set here in Atlanta, Georgia. So my book is about an immigrant woman who moves here to Atlanta, and trapped in a loveless arranged marriage, and she must find the courage and the self-belief to get over her own inner fears and also all the barriers to happiness. So that's what the book is about. My book released in fall of 2020, like I mentioned, and it has won. I was fortunate that it won a few awards, like American Fiction Award. It was the runner-up in the Georgia Author of the Year for Georgia Author of the Year. And I'm sorry, I'm just not prepared for this. So I'm just babbling.
It's okay.
But yeah, it's been a great journey since the book was published. But it took me 10 years to find a publisher for the book because getting published here is, as you all must know, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do in life. But I'm glad it's out there, and it's doing well. It has reached a lot of readers, and it makes me happy when somebody comes up to me and tells me that my little book has helped someone, a victim of domestic violence, because that is the major theme of the book, helped a victim to find courage or to hold on or to believe in herself. That makes the entire journey and all the challenges worth it.
Thank you.
Cindy, once again.
Absolutely. Didn't mean to catch you off guard. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
If there aren't any more questions, I'll just wrap it up by saying thank you so much for letting me present to you today. And a particular thank you, Stephanie. It was so wonderful to have you. I felt like it was meant to be, like you were my interviewer. So thank you. And I think Ravina would agree with this. If you read the book and if you would like to do a review, it's very helpful to authors when you do a review on Amazon. I don't think you need to buy the book through Amazon to do a review on Amazon. And just in addition to the Spirit Rock class that Bhikkhuni Dhammananda is doing, there's one on forgiveness. June 27th at Inside LA. And I'm sorry, it hasn't been advertised yet, so there's no link to it. But you could look for it. And that's another opportunity for you to see her live. And if you're so moved and you would like to speak to her, as Veena did one-on-one, I do a very informal program called Casual Buddhism. It's a 15 to 20-minute conversation. You come with a question, and it's a spiritual question or a question about Buddhism. And, she'll just tune right in. She'll dive right into what you personally need to hear. So that's an opportunity available to you. And I'm going to type my email in just so you'll know how you can get a hold of me. I'm so untechnical, it's ridiculous. Anyway, yes, I did it. Good. Okay, so thank you all very much. And yeah, may you be well, may you be happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It was wonderful to have you here. Is there anything else you want to share? Any other, do you have a website or anything like that?
Oh, yes, I do. It's just cindyrasicot.com. Not really. I mean, the truth of my teaching, I wrote the book because I had a spiritual calling to do so. I was sitting with her one after she gave that statement that I gave the Dharma talk for you, and I literally felt a physical sensation from her to me through my body. And I realized, oh, I'm supposed to be the catalyst that brings her voice into the world. Mm. And I wanted to bring her voice into the world because she helped me so much. And I want her to help others. So that's how I would end it. Thank you.